Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of the CFL Trade Tree. My name is Robert Dalton, affectionately known as Dalts. You know, when I've been doing these CFL Trade Trees, there's not a lot of questions, but the questions that I do get kind of are the same, and there's two of them I get. The first of which is, Dalts, why do you do a lot of your trade tree surrounding the Bombers? And that could be answered easily as that when I first started doing this project, you know, you're being a hardcore Bomber fan, you go with what you know with the trades that have actually come to the top of your head, so there's really not a lot of research that you have to do. Great. The second question is, hey Dalts, why do you not have anything having to do with the Ottawa Redblacks? And that can be answered in two ways. The first way to answer that is the Redblacks are a very relatively young franchise, so any trades that they have done at least in 2014 don't have that many legs. By the way, I will actually prove to myself that I am stupid when it comes to that later on in this video. More on that later. The second way to actually answer that question is, well, in the amount of the trades that I've done actually start prior to the Ottawa Redblacks becoming an existent franchise in the CFL. So while that there are a lot of the trades actually branch out well past their existence, to be honest, I can't answer that. That's something you have to ask of the other 8 teams. I don't know, it's not my call. When I originally wanted to do this video, I had actually wanted to dissect a few trades that the Ottawa Redblacks done in 2014 to see, hey, maybe there's a couple of trades that maybe explain how the Ottawa Redblacks became Grey Cup champions. We cannot ignore Henry Burris in 2014, Ellington, Ernest Jackson, Brad Sinopoli, Chris Williams in 2015, and they were very integral parts of being Grey Cup champions. We cannot ignore that. But as any smart general manager would do, especially with an expansion franchise, Marcel Desjardins did enough to at least collect a lot of assets in 2014. So one of the first trades that I wanted to dissect was the one that traded a first overall pick in 2014 in exchange for John Gott. I can never tell those two apart. John Gott was an integral part of the offensive line, was the Eastern Division's nominee for Most Outstanding Player, and was a key cognate of that offensive line on the 2016 year. To be quite honest, I just really wanted to watch John Gott crush some beers.
John got a beer. He made short work of it too.
That might be legend status right there.
Second trade that I could probably mention is probably the rare occurrence that John Hufnagel got fleeced in a deal. Yes, it happened. The trade saw Justin Phillips and a third-round pick in 2014 that ended up being used on defensive lineman Nigel Romick. In exchange, the Calgary Stampeders got a third-round pick in 2014 and a third-round pick in 2015. Those selections were used to select offensive linemen Laurent Duvernay-Tardif and Tyler Varga. We know Tardif is someone who has played on the Kansas City Chiefs, most notably just winning the Super Bowl this past year and opting not to return to play in lieu of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, when you take a look at all these, you probably see, well, Justin Phillips and Nigel Romick isn't exactly a fleece, but when you consider that neither Tardif or Varga, for whatever reasons of their own, likely are not going to step onto a CFL field anytime soon. So yeah, based on what they got, Calgary got fleeced. The third trade, though, that I really want to talk about is pretty much what this trade tree is going to reveal itself. So without further ado, let's take a quick look. Yeah, you can tell that, you know, when teachers tell you to double check your work, just do it. Just do it. Because when I first started doing this video, I was like, oh, this is going to be the shortest video, and it very well could be, but not for lack of the trade. It just would have actually been shorter than this video actually will be. I don't even know what it's going to be, trust me. So to start this out, the Ottawa Redblacks sent Kevin Glenn, yes, the Kevin Glenn, in exchange for a 5th overall pick in 2014. See, there should be some backstory here. A, Kevin Glenn was taken from the Calgary Stampeders in the expansion draft, and lo and behold, when Marcel Desjardins said, hey, we've got Henry Burris available, let's sign him to turn around our franchise, Kevin Glenn became expendable, used the old social media hacked excuse, and Kevin Glenn became tradable, and hence this trade. Now, before we continue, I feel that we need to revalue Kevin Glenn because, yeah, a starting quarterback may be worth a 5th overall pick. But let's not forget that about 18 months after this, Kevin Glenn was traded from Saskatchewan to Montreal for a 5th round pick. A 5th round, not a 5th overall, a 5th round. And then a year after that, the Bombers acquired Kevin Glenn from the Alouettes for a 4th round pick. I know different situations, but I feel maybe we're undervaluing. But the devil's in the details. I'll explain later on in this video about how not senile Wally Buono is. BC Lions get 1 full year out of Kevin Glenn. Not exactly the most outstanding numbers. Got him to the playoff as a Western Division crossover team before getting one and done and spanked by the Montreal Alouettes. Yeah. And then he became a free agent and signed with the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and now you know the rest of the story. Well, in exchange for that, as we know, the Ottawa Redblacks got a 5th overall pick, and they decided to trade that as well with the 10th overall pick to the Montreal Alouettes in exchange for the 4th and 13th overall pick. Now, because this is an Ottawa Redblack themed video, I'm not going to go into details to what the 4th and 13th pick is quite yet. Let's follow these trades here, shall we? Well, the Montreal Alouettes decided to use those selections. They selected offensive lineman at 5th overall, David Foucault, and at 10th overall, they selected linebacker Andrew Liu. Great. Foucault was a journeyman offensive lineman in the NFL, and by the time that he ran that course in the NFL, he decided to try up north, but it just wasn't going to be with the Montreal Alouettes. At that point, Montreal traded Foucault and the rights to Vincent Brown to the BC Lions in exchange for offensive lineman Javon Alafoy. Foucault signed a 3-year deal with the BC Lions. Vincent Brown didn't really do anything. In fact, I don't even know if he reported to training camp. Here's an interesting thing that will go back to my original points about Kevin Glenn's value. Javon Alafoy was due a roster bonus in 2018. He was released and re-signed with the BC Lions. So when I told you about undervaluing Kevin Glenn or overvaluing Kevin Glenn, from 2014 to the point when Alafoy actually re-signed with the BC Lions, the BC Lions relatively gave up nothing. They got 1 full year of Kevin Glenn, 3 years of Foucault, and all it cost them was 1 year without Javon Alafoy. That's pretty decent. If you think about it, that's really, really decent. Let's focus on this, right? All right, so that's the end of that branch. Let's go back to Andrew Liu, shall we? After 2 years with the Alouettes at the CFL trade deadline in 2016. Yes, there was a trade deadline, just not a lot of people really realize it, and we don't have an 8-hour show dissecting one particular trade or 3 minor league trades. Andrew Liu was shipped off to the Saskatchewan Roughriders in exchange for a 31st overall pick in 2018. Liu finished off the season with Saskatchewan that year and signed with the Edmonton Edmonton Football Club. I promised myself I wouldn't do that, and that ended that branch. Well, the Montreal Alouettes packaged that 31st overall pick in 2018 in a blockbuster deal. And I say blockbuster because it involved multiple players and multiple draft picks. But, you know, in the CFL, these blockbusters tend to not work out to match the hype. That 31st overall pick was packaged with the 1st overall pick, the 44th overall pick, and a 10th overall pick in 2019. This is interesting. The 1st overall pick was used to select receiver Mark Chapman. We know the story, no need to go further into that. It didn't work out for Hamilton. 31st overall pick was used to select Marcus Davis. Didn't do anything. 44th overall pick was used to select linebacker Michael Moore. Again, nothing doing, but it's relatively earlier. That 2019 10th overall pick was rather interesting. That was used to select Nikolai Kalinic. Didn't have a lot of stats, played about 16 out of the possible 18 games. His stats don't really speak outstanding, but he had one good game. It was 1 catch for 31 yards, and what a catch, because it was resulted in a touchdown in week 2. And then when you realize who they played in week 2, it was the Toronto Argonauts, and then you take a look at the scoreboard. And then you start thinking, oh, who didn't score against the Argonauts that game? Yeah. All right, well, who did the Montreal Alouettes get? Well, they acquired Ryan Bobbin, Jamal Robinson, the second overall pick in 2018, the 34th overall pick in 2018, and the 56th overall pick in 2018. Ryan Bobbin's tenure in Montreal didn't last that long. He was packaged with a 2020 third round pick to the Toronto Argonauts in exchange for TJ Heath and a 22nd overall pick in 2020. Toronto used that selection to select running back Dion Pelerin. Montreal used that 22nd overall selection and used it on offensive lineman Carter O'Donnell. It's relatively early. COVID has really put a damper in a lot of these players' plans, especially with the teams. We don't know if they're actually going to be able to step onto the CFL season, much less this year or even in the near future, because there's going to be... Jamal Robinson never really amounted to anything. I don't even know if he reported to training camp. That second overall pick in Montreal, that ended up being Trey Rutherford. Trey Rutherford had a rough start to his career in 2018. However, he did turn around in 2019. I plead patience, please, with these offensive linemen. They will eventually work themselves out. It was probably one of the reasons why Montreal was able to protect Vernon Adams, and he became a most outstanding player nominee coming out of the Montreal Alouettes, and was the reason that they actually are now a respectable franchise, and nobody remembers that Kivas Reed was their general manager. That 34th overall pick was actually sent off to the BC Lions. More on that later. The 56th overall pick was used to select receiver Richmond Natia. All right, it still hasn't done anything yet. Again, it's still early. The 34th overall pick, which, by the way, for all you trivia people out there, was actually a pick that was acquired in the Charleston Hughes, when Charleston Hughes had the proverbial cup of coffee as a Hamilton Tiger Cat. Shooting star. The BC Lions acquired that 34th overall pick, and they used it on Isaiah Guzlek-Messam. In exchange, the Montreal Alouettes got the 38th and the 46th overall pick that year. The 46th overall pick was used to select offensive lineman Paul Kozacek. Nothing doing yet so far. The 38th overall pick was used to select running back Ryder Stone. A heck of a name, a heck of a football name. And the guy is quite the player, averaging just under 5 yards per carry, couple of touchdowns. If it wasn't for a guy named William Stanback, I'd have no qualms with calling Ryder Stone a top 10 CFL running back in. Well, that'll do it for this trade tree. Oh yeah, it's an Ottawa Redblack thing. Let's go back to what the Ottawa Redblacks used with those two selections. Well, 13th overall, they selected receiver Scott McDonnell. Not exactly a homegrown name, not a name-branded individual, but he is dual purpose. I'm surprised that he didn't get a lot of touches in 2019 because it was the Ottawa Redblacks. At 4th overall, yeah, Ottawa got a lot of value out of this. They selected safety Antoine Pruneau. Yeah. During his 6 years with the Ottawa Redblacks, accruing over 320 tackles, over 50 special teams tackles, because he's just like that, sacks, 10 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, and a touchdown. And he was a West Eastern All-Star in 2017, and he capped off a very good career, which still has a couple years left, by hoisting the Grey Cup in 2016. Yeah. Marcel Desjardins has his doubters, and then rightfully so, by his lack of retaining talent and his previous regime as GM with the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and being responsible for the downward spiral under Jim Popp of the Montreal Alouettes prior to taking the job at the Redblacks. However, he did what any responsible GM was supposed to do when taking over an expansion franchise. You get what you can get for what the current players, and you collect assets that you could build and develop in the near future. It worked, and in the CFL, with 1 year, 2 year contracts, and with free agency happening quite frequently, he built a team, and in the second year, took that team to the Grey Cup. They lost, but they won it in the third year. They went and represented the East in the 5th year. Very formidable job, and you can say what you want about the Eastern Division, but Marcel Desjardins has done his job as a CFL GM, and it's made Ottawa quite profitable and quite successful. Well, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like what you saw, hit the subscribe, comment below. If you have any feature suggestions about any future trade trees, again, hit the comment below. And you can also mention us on Twitter. I'm available at Rouge Dalts, my podcast at Rouge Radio. And of course, this video is powered by the Canadian Football Podcast Network. You can follow them at CF Pod Network on Twitter. Next video will be answering the question is, can a franchise and an elite quarterback be traded twice in his career? And we answer that with, well, we already answered it with Kahari Jones back in 2000 and 2004. But we go to look into his boss in 2004, the head coach of Calgary Stampeders, Matt Denigan. Yes, it happened twice, and it happened for quite the package. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.